Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. This week we are back to a few experiments and a new process here that I've wanted to explore for a while, and felt that I would make it a video here, as it's something I've always seen around and wanted to try, but I've never quite followed through with it, as I wasn't sure what I had been doing. With this, I had an idea and a sketch that I wasn't doing much with otherwise, and determination to finally work this all out and give it a go. My only aim for it this time is to finish the image and not give up halfway through or lose motivation like I have done with this experiment in the past. Being said, today I'm working out how to draw with gradient maps. As I have said, it is something I've seen around and the outcomes tend to look really cool whenever I see them, which means I've wanted to try it for the longest time now. So this time, I want to give it a proper try. If it fails, then oh well, and I will simply make notes on what to change for next time. If it works, however, well, we will have to see how it could combine into my other processes. But following my usual format, I do want to talk about the ideas for the drawing and sketch, before touching on the colouring process that I used this time. I mean, that will make up a significant portion of things here, so it feels better to go in order of development as it is. So yes. The idea for this one actually ties into a few other things that are in the works at the moment. As I have hinted towards and mentioned in previous videos, I am in the process of world building for a larger project at the moment, and that is something I'm making significant progress on in terms of development and building out to something substantial. Yet part of it does mean that I'm developing ideas for characters, environments, and, more relating to this piece, themes for religions and other aspects of the world that would function. It means that my starting point, again, had been in the notes made about this project, and had been generated there as to how the system may work, and how it relates to the world, and other variations of the idea to account for how it would come into play, and just how it would tie into everything else and other aspects of the world at the same time. This is part of the religion branch in the world building though. I mean, there are a few options and systems that I'm throwing around at the moment, and there are a few that are slotting into place as I work on it. Yet this sketch began as an experiment in terms of visuals for a section of the project and part of a set almost. Those other sketches being set aside at the moment as I don't quite know to what degree I need them finished at the moment. This one, however, to stay on topic, proved to be the one I wanted to experiment with and do the gradient maps on, since it gave me the most potential to experiment in this region and to explore the figure with it. The core of the sketch had been a theme of space, almost. It's where the planet came from, alongside the moon motif that I repeated across the character. And, very much later, elements of stars that came to be added to the piece. I wanted something that clearly associated the figure with the element, and to keep it simple, so that, if needed later, I can work it into other locations and imagery to suit the story's need and the world's need. Doing this also helped me work out symbols that may be associated with each figure, and sort of further cement some areas that I had been struggling on. And as I've said, they are the only one in progress at the moment, though all are fairly similar in terms of sketches. They're simple and direct, and something more done to work stuff out with, rather than needing to render and finish them all in their entirety. Right now, I'm leaning more towards finishing them as a sort of set, perhaps, so that it's a bit easier later down the line. Yet, even if I don't do that, or even if I do finish this set, I will end up making other references for them that are a bit clearer and intended as a reference before a piece of art. Which, I will admit, this one became focused on the art and technique the more that I worked with it. Yet, this all means that the idea phase had been fun. It let me consider elements of the wings and how it would relate into beliefs and imagery in a fantasy setting. It also let me look at the ideas of religion and the messages it would carry, and how these may be conveyed visually in the settings, and how these may change as well. It wasn't something that played into this sketch, most of it being worked out separately as I went since I had this as a visual anchor. Yet it did spur a lot of consideration over it for future reference and development, and that goes for every other sketch also sat waiting. I mean, after finishing this one, my list of questions to answer for the world building, and specifically this part of the religion, has grown a significant amount that I am slowly making my way through. But hey, anything to help it come together and make a bit more sense. With it all set up, however, it then became my experiment before anything else, as I've already hinted towards. I sort of decided that it was time that I worked this out regardless of any and all distractions, and I would create an outcome for this that I would come to like. So with that goal established, let's turn attention towards the gradient map experiment and the process that I had been taking with it. First and foremost, I've seen it commonly begin with values and grayscale works, as the gradient map will colour across values rather than anything else. So all of this sort of meant that I began there. Working in values is something I've done more as a practice in the background before anything else, though to be honest. It is rare that I will limit myself to it or make an outcome with a significant portion of it. Especially since 9 times out of 10 I prefer working with colour and will choose it over anything else. And this is simply because I have fun with the colour more often than values, which sort of explains my choice there, as I also feel that I can do more with it and push the piece a bit further with colour than without. So in this one, it was sort of strange to work with it as values and such before ever looking at colour palettes or using that to outline and establish the sections of colour. It wasn't entirely unlike my usual process, mainly when it came to shading, but it was certainly an unusual start when it came to look at it. I think, looking back at my private experiments with it, that this starting point had been my main stumbling block of moving past the changes and pushing on with a new process that I don't really know. I mean, I never quite knew how to work out the next stage of it, and as I have mentioned, I don't get as excited for monotone images that I do with colour. They can look cool, and a lot of them do look nice, but creating them is a bit different. So, mostly in the past, I would get bored of the experiment before anything and redirect attention to something else as soon as I took a break from it. This time though, I got into the flow of it and let myself enjoy it. I've recently done a painting for my family that was monotone, so it kind of settled somewhat as a practice for that. I saw it simply as an experiment for that painting where I got used to working in values, as I did start this before that painting. Yet I finished this one after that painting, if it makes sense. But all it meant was that I just went with the tones and looked at it as values, rather than rushing into the colour I usually try doing when experimenting with this. I mean, I do usually rush a bit because that's the fun part after all. Yet, as with everything else, it does help to have a stronger base when working it all out. Again though, working with a sketch for another project also helped this area, as it sort of meant that I wanted it to work out rather than valuing it only as an experiment, even though at this point it is primarily the experiment, if that makes any sort of sense. I am sort of talking in circles, I get it. However, working with the values had been rather enjoyable at this point too. It's strange since I did get lost in it and just kept going with it, even through points where I would otherwise break for it. Yes, through it, I did map out some gradients on it here and there as I went, just before it was done. You may notice a few of these. Yet this was ultimately because I wanted to preview it before I finished it, to ensure that I was on the right enough track. See, the way I approach things may not be the best or the most efficient. It certainly doesn't always make sense to others, but when I am trying something new, I will usually just mess around with it until it works. Like with this. I tried it months ago to work it out on my own, just with other pieces, to have various results and other avenues that I will likely revisit as I explore this technique more. But I did that without proper research or exploration or any sort of tutorial, as it was more fun for me at the time to just mess. And more often than not, I find that this approach lets me find a way to use it that works for me. And whether that is the proper way or not to do it doesn't really matter in most senses. And I do tend to do a lot of things like this. Yet the more I mess up, the more I realise that there are sections or things that I can't work out, or would find easier searching. So that is then the point where I look things up or actually try to find a tutorial that would help me. In this case, I found examples of processes online some weeks ago that used grayscale as the start. It kind of gave me another thing to try that I hadn't thought of before, especially since my earlier attempts were on finished pieces that I had used a variety of colours on. So then here we are, trying that avenue and getting used to the starting process being something entirely different than what I'm used to. And, just to be clear, I saw the grayscale start and noted it as a point to try. From there, I'm happily back to messing around and seeing what works and what doesn't. With this completed as well, I will be looking again at tying it into other pieces I've done, just now that I sort of have a better understanding of how it works. It could end up pretty cool, and as I've said, I have a bank of sketches waiting for something to be done with them if I feel like it. Yet I do want to address a challenge that I had with the process. See, I set the gradient to normal at first, and in every preview. It was okay, I liked it and it was interesting to see it all come together. Yet doing that did make me consider if it would work better in a colour or on a piece with my normal process. I don't even really know how to explain it. It was nice, and it was similar to the results that I've seen and looked at for this process. Yet in the end it did make me consider a few things about it. Mainly in Clip Studio Paint and many other drawing things, there are things called correction layers that blend and mix colours in interesting ways. Someone did once explain how each one worked to me, but that was ages ago and I will admit, I've forgotten it. For this as well, it isn't too relevant how each one works. But it does interesting stuff to the piece, and I love using them too and commonly refer to them in digital works. So with this, I decided to push a little bit further with the gradient map when it came to finalising it. And this was a stage that sort of got taken off camera. It was something I did a lot of back and forth with, as I wasn't sure quite what was off with it multiple times. I mean, it was something where I considered if I would finish the piece or not, or try a new experiment, or approach it differently. In the end, I turned to the blending and correction layers to sort of see if I could get something cool with it, this way. And, as usual, my answer was yes. In the end, I used 3 layers of the same gradient. The gradient I used was one of the defaults in Clip Studio, the sunset one, I believe. Yet it resulted in this range of purple to yellow that, as I mentioned, was alright on its own. But I set the first layer to multiply, a layer which commonly darkens the colours I use and adds a sense of depth to things, which is why I usually refer to it for shading. This one was alright, but it was looking a bit dark in the end. So an earlier experiment saw the layer set to a hard light setting. This being something I don't really know what it does, but it is something I use a fair bit as the results tend to be quite nice. This experiment almost ended up being the one I went with before trying the multiply layer. But seeing as this makes things look brighter and the multiply was too dark, I wanted to try mixing it by lowering the opacity of each. In the end, it added a sense of brightness to it all, and the multiply added the depth to the darkest points, as I kind of intended it would. Finally, the lowest layer was something I tried as an experiment, and honestly tried as a bit of a joke. I used the Add Glow layer a lot, that and the regular Add option. It creates a nice glowing effect I rely on in a few areas of multiple project, and it very rarely lets me down. So I wanted to try it below these 2 layers as a sort of joke, as I knew it would be very, very bright. But when I lowered the opacity on this layer, as I did with everything else, and put it below the other 2, it sort of finalised it in a way that I can't explain. It added that final angle of interest that I could work with and wanted to work with in this respect. And also a note here, I did mess with other gradients layering over each other and interacting in a similar way. It looked amazing as well and they were equally interesting. Definitely something I'll look at in other pieces. But I only chose this route since it fit the theme of the sketch better and it was something I wanted to carry further. It was the experiment for this time. In another piece, I will likely look again at merging gradients and the effects that it can bring. I mean, there were a fair few that I wanted to try out, and even more that looked interesting to me. So, who knows? I may combine it in a later video and drawing where I do multiple tests at once. But that is the fun part of art in all of this. Yet joining the layers together how I did, it finalised it. I still had extra work to do, yes. Things to still shade and colourful hints to add through the piece. More on that in a moment. Yet the gradient was done and I liked it. It then, as said, became a matter of balancing it with the colours outside of this palette or enhancing ones that were there. Now, for example, this is the blue and yellow that came to be present in the latest sections. And truthfully, these hints of colours made a massive difference in the end. It took it from a single gradient piece and something sort of all too similar into something I was excited to finish, as there was difference and interest to give it everything a little bit more context and intrigue. And again, these two hints and tones were things that I didn't exactly plan. To be fair, my plan was to use the grayscale, then go into gradients, and to kind of go from there, since I didn't know how the early stages would be and how they'd pan out, so I couldn't exactly plan much further. And when I went from there, the gradient was a little too similar and one note. Yes, I know I could have changed one layer of the gradient to include some other colours, but I wanted to explore how something else would work first. The yellow was at the lightest point of the gradient, which sort of spurred me to explore that route with adding a stronger presence of it as a colour alone. And it was looking nice. I liked it a lot, and it let me push a bit further with those areas that I wanted to explore. And it also doubled as experimenting with the gradient maps and colour bases, rather than just black and white at the same time. The blue then came from there. It was a bit more of an experiment to tie in a colour that wasn't in the gradient. Something different and strong that would have still had a hue from the purple from the gradient, mainly due to the order of the layers and how it all panned out in that aspect. But it was something different that complemented the piece to include the needed interest. It made it more like space and highlighted that theme of the sketch. So again, I kept doing it to see how it would end up. And quite unexpectedly, it was something that worked out really well. So I will end up tying that into later experiments in this avenue. Though, with the process out of the way, let's kind of touch on some of the details here, shall we? I've touched on how the motifs came together and that part of the sketch, but realistically, there are a few more things that I can and will touch on just before we get into the end of the video here. The first of these are the wings. Now, these are a detail that I love to draw, but never quite have a process for shading them. I mean, they are cool, and I do love adding them into a character, especially with the project I'm working on, but have never quite been able to work out exactly how to approach them each time. So every single time I draw them kind of turns into a trial and error stage, that I do often leave for last, like this time. The wings are key to the imagery and the stories built around this section as well, so removing them would be a bit of reworking things in the world building aspect. And I mean, I could have done that, but it was something that I didn't really want to do for the sake of an easier drawing. And in the end, I do like how they turned out. They are simple, and it is an impression before anything else, but it does then work with the piece, and I have a vague idea now with how I would approach later drawings of this figure, as they would also tend to be more in the background of later things. Otherwise, I have a sense for if I decide to complete the other sketches in this set. Yet the uncertainty is really why I left the wings until the end and focus on everything around them until this point. This is also something I do with drawings quite a bit, yet it tends to work out well in the end. I will also admit that putting that off kind of let me focus on other things a little better. In this time, I looked at the gradient, and also some of the other areas in lighting around the figure. This leads into the second detail quite nicely, which I can really only summarise as the scribbles. See, part of setting it all up had been just using larger and wider shapes that I could define and work on further at a later point. I needed everything set up and in a sort of arrangement rather than picking out the details straight away, at least for the process of the background. On the person, I could define sections a little more as I went and rework where I needed. Yet, with the background and the spaces around, I worked larger and tended to define it from there. I mean, I took larger scribbles into smaller ones to make them look a little bit more purposeful and detailed, when really it was still a group of scribbles that I made up as I went. This is then a trick used a fair bit in various things, as it's one of those that looks better from a distance or when looking at it normally. For this one though, it helped me complete the environment and sort of further the impression of light and space that I was going for, and that was before I added the stars into it. Then I kind of reused it around the figure to add a sense of magic into it, and a sense that it's something not solid. It was magic or light or space before anything else. And that was then what spurred me to add the stars right at the very end. It looked like space without them, and I knew I didn't need them. Yet with everything else, it was a final touch that finished everything off and brought it together to kind of finalise the impression I was aiming towards. Though with those out of the way, I do want to talk a little bit away from the art with the final minutes here. I sort of touched on earlier how I approach new things, and behind all of this, I am also looking into more animation in small amounts. Nothing large for now, more just how I could use it to enhance images like this, or other ones like I did for a while in the past. Yet I'm using the same approach of messing around and eventually working things out as I go, and using tutorials where needed. There have been some things that I'm working out, and it is a process I'm enjoying as well, so it may come to be included in a video like this or something eventually. Right now though, it is all still in basic ways, and small things as I introduce myself to it, but I do have ideas for beyond that too. Things that I'm working towards, if you will. I suppose that this is also why I'm in a mood to experiment as of late. I do enjoy my usual processes and imagery, don't get me wrong, but I also have times like this where I want to try new things and push a little beyond that comfort zone to expand skills that I already have, and to expand on ones that I don't. It's like before when I did animated illustrations. I looked at moving lights and dots as a simple start, and it was something that I did enjoy. I kind of went off it for a while, mainly as things got busy and my inspirations changed. But now I'm back to it, so there may be a few experiments here and there that I kind of want to do. It's this idea of playing with the process and trying new things. There is no harm in learning a new skill at the end of the day, or developing it a little. And again, part of this motivation again ties into the project I'm world building for, as there are imagery there and ideas that I want to make, that means I have to experiment and push a bit further. But it is fun either way, even if things leave me with a headache and confusion, or reaching towards a tutorial to help me work out the hard parts. It is something though that I hope to introduce here soon enough. However, that does bring us into the end here. We're wrapping things up, so as always, I hope you've enjoyed it and thank you for watching this far. This piece had always been an experimental one, and this video is more something I made because I wanted to do it. I wanted to document this process for myself so I don't forget it in the future, and if I do, I have something to build off and refer back to. It's also interesting to see how it comes together and how a simple goal of finishing a picture can lead to a piece that I actually quite love. The character design may change the more the world develops, yes, but for now, it's the character, and I do enjoy this outcome as it also spurs more ideas for the world building. Being said, I hope you join me next time and have a wonderful day. Goodbye!